in Western Christendom, we've divided the sacred and the profane, and we've been left, I think, with essentially a sacred art in Western Europe rather than a religious art.
And we're going to move on now, aren't we, to the Islamic gallery to explore this thought in a different faith, a different culture, and from a different part of the world.
Yes, because I think that division didn't happen in Islam, and that mixture of the religious in the daily life of people in art and in crafts has survived. Well, we're now in the Islamic gallery, and I think it's very interesting how differently that notion of bringing the divine into daily life can operate in Islam. Partly, of course, because in Islam it's done through words, through inscriptions, through language. So if you begin, for instance, with this earthenware bowl from Iran around 900-1000, beautiful bowl with the inscription around it saying that the noblest of riches is the abandonment of desire. Quite a paradoxical statement for what's obviously rather a luxury dish, but nonetheless it demonstrates that once you have words used in this way, as they are in the Islamic tradition, then the name of God can come into daily life. And beside the dish, we have some wonderful scissors of the 18th and 19th century, where inscribed into the metal of the scissors are the beautiful names of God. So that every day, as you as a tailor or a housewife or whatever use the scissors, you are handling the name of God. And the word of God, the name of God, is part of your daily life. It's that kind of fusion of the daily and the divine that I think has survived much more in an Islamic tradition than in certainly the Western Christian tradition. And it can be endlessly renewed. We've got very contemporary material here over the last couple of years, really, made by artists from Iraq, artists from China, showing how the Islamic tradition renews itself and goes on finding ways of proclaiming a faith in the context of art and craft.
The collections here at the British Museum range infinitely more widely than the work produced by the students of the Prince's School of Traditional Arts, and your emphasis here is on the universal in art, or that's the way you'd want it to be seen. How do you understand the relationship between the universal and the culturally specific dimensions of sacred art?
When the British Museum was being made in the middle of the 18th century, one of the things that fascinated the collectors was that all around the world every society had a religion, and every society needed to articulate its relationship to God. And I think that's one of the purposes that the museum can still fulfill, both with historic objects and contemporary objects. If you want to know how people now see their relationship to God and compare it, you can do that here. And what is remarkable is that every society, I think, still needs to find new languages to articulate their changing relationship with God as the world changes around them. And you can see that in the objects.
Can I just ask you finally, Khalid Azam believes that art is a safe language, as he puts it, to explore and promote multi-faith understanding. Do you agree with him on that?
I don't think it's ever safe to embark on conversations with the divine. I think art enables very difficult conversations to take place. It also allows, I think, a much more rapid access to a faith tradition which is not your own. It's very hard for most people to read their way into another way of relating to God. Most of us can get there much, much faster, either through music or through visual art. And that, I think, is the great value of it at the moment in a multi-faith society, that I can much more quickly get to an understanding of what Hinduism is about through Hindu sculpture than through reading Hindu texts.
This piece of music was inspired by a recent and poignant example of the relationship between art and faith. It's from the fifth movement of Rothko Chapel, composed by Morton Feldman. In the mid-1960s, the artist Mark Rothko was commissioned to design a place of meditation that would be filled with his paintings. The result was the non-denominational Rothko Chapel in Houston, Texas, a work of modern art in itself and home to 14 predominantly black Rothko paintings. After battling with depression, he committed suicide in 1970 and tragically did not see his chapel completed. Usama Shahade, or Sama, is another graduating student at the Prince's School of Traditional Arts. His family is originally from Jordan. He's experimented with a range of textures and materials, glass, slate, wood and ceramics, as well as working less traditionally with computers on the long and sometimes painful journey to his final piece of work at the school. Having spoken to a number of the students, it seemed to me that they worked in different ways. Some approached their art from their sense of the sacred, while others were drawn towards the sacred through their art. Is this something Sama recognised?
From one sense, viewing my colleagues here and their approach, I find it fascinating and very interesting to see how much their work is a prayer and that cycle between the art and their loves. Myself, I don't actually have a religion, not that I don't believe in the sacred, but I don't have a religion and a tradition to tie to that in a sense. But my experience of the sacred and art is something which, in a sense, I feel my art brings me closer to. I have a strange cycle where I believe that once you're in tune and in touch with the sacred, in a sense, the art is going to flourish and be incredibly beautiful. But at the same time, the art is something to bring you towards that. So it's not in a sense to wait until you're enlightened, in a sense, to be able to create, but actually the act of creating helps you to realize, in a sense, your own limitations, your own blocks in yourself. But it also helps, the practices, some of them are very meditative, and it helps you to calm down, to center yourself in that way. So, in a sense, the practice is a spiritual path, making you aware of yourself, aware of where your limitations are, and aware of the path to follow.
So does Sama share the view expressed so often at the school that art creates harmony between religious traditions where there might otherwise be conflict?
Absolutely. Throughout the arts, throughout music, throughout nature, geometry is universal. It is found, used, explored, expressed everywhere. The way I understand it is an expression of proportion, of harmony, of number, and whether it is expressed musically or through visual arts, through experience, through nature. And, for example, within the arts, you could have Christian icon painting, Islamic, Native American, and they're all actually exploring, whether intuitively or intentionally, these harmonies. You see these different expressions, like you can understand with music. You have different styles of music, especially if you consider like all Western music. They're all based on the same scale, most of the time using the same instruments but expressing in so different ways, but there is this foundation of the same harmonies they're using. If you can appreciate the underlying harmonies between these arts, then you can see that relationship between the unity and diversity.
Yet, if all the forms of divinely inspired artistic expression we've been hearing about in these two programmes had been effective as building blocks for humanity, as Neil MacGregor calls them, then why does the world continue to see so much inhumanity and conflict and suffering? In his poem Psalmodics, Anthony Thwaite ponders the influence of the timeless intoning of the tenets of the world's faiths.
These old, arcane contritions, ancient sounds compounded of such alien traditions, Shinto, Judaic, Syriac, Hindu, thread beseeching wails with solemn ululations over the holy places, over the buried dead. canticle, Veda, Sutra, chant their still archaic keening among the killing grounds, the darkness into which their pure sounds spill. Something to do with love, with grief, with death, all share this common melody, ascend and fall and rise again, repeat again, cadences that return, that never end, until the melisma of extended pain shudders and drops its wordless, stubborn stress with resignation, with exhausted breath, over the risen hope, over the hopelessness.
If Anthony Thwaites' poem finds ultimately reason to be optimistic, so too did the American architect Frank Lloyd Wright, working in a society increasingly worshipping industrialization and mechanization. Lloyd Wright found his reason for hope in what he called our creative faculty. Science and philosophy, he wrote, had known but little of those inner experiences of the soul we call art and religion. Imagination was the instrument by which the creative force in people works its miracles. And without giving rein to the individual creative impulse, civilization could only die a miserable death. The evidence of these two programs exploring the art of faith is, it seems to me, that imagination and creativity are thriving as they always have. But the question is how much we value them and make use of them. If the excited, exhausted class of 2010 has anything to do with it, communities across the world will, in the coming years, not only relearn the value of these ancient art forms, but will rediscover the creative imagination, technical skill and spiritual discipline that produces them. This is Ghulam Haider Dalpota.
You can say this is my final degree show, but for me, this is the beginning of my journey. So now we will put in our training, and we are going to, inshallah, develop an institute in Pakistan, and we will give the education to new generations. And as well, I will put these things in my practice so that we can see these things in a living tradition, but not in the museums.
My family is here and all our friends. And my son said, "Mum, I didn't realize that you've been working so hard, that you've been so prolific." They see me dabbling a little bit at home and small bits and pieces, and then once they see it all together, "Mum, this is you, it is all your work."
Since I last year, and I was up against it, I've still been up against it until about half an hour ago. It was a real journey. Right now I feel very happy. I feel very scared, like on the edge of the abyss really, like what happens next. But I mean, we've talked a lot about it a lot with the tutors and our plans and ideas, but it's still a big unknown. But yeah, I feel very happy with the work I've achieved.
There's a tremendous feeling of relief because the past 3 months, every other moment has been an adrenaline rush, and with every heartbeat there's been a thought of deadlines, thought of the love of quality that I had in mind, and the fear of compromising lurking like a shadow. And I am so glad, by the grace of God, to say today that we made no compromise in quality, and it's such a feeling of joy and accomplishment to be standing here with all the work up and breathing a sigh of relief that it all went even better than we could have ever possibly imagined.